In this video series, we're going to start talking about how to sculpt our terrain in Scene Designer. Before we begin, we must create a terrain. If you navigate to the General palette and the Terrain palette, you can see that there's a default terrain entity. If we double-click our default terrain and then left-click in our perspective viewport, we can create our terrain. I'm going to maximize our perspective viewport to make it a little easier to edit. So now you can see we have our terrain. Obviously it's very flat and not interesting, but I want to show you a couple things. First, go to Rendering Modes, Wireframe. You can see that our terrain sector, which is about 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, with 1 meter spacing between vertices, is properly LOD'd. As I zoom in and out, you can see the LOD levels are changing. Now let's go ahead and start painting our terrain. Switch back to the standard rendering mode and go to our Terrain Editor command panel. Select the Sculpt element and add an Elevation Sculpt tool. I'm going to actually lower our percentage down a little bit and increase the size of our brush. Now we can start painting. As you can see, we're slowly elevating our terrain. I'm going to go and adjust our strength to be a little stronger. And create a little mountain. In case you're wondering, the reason the lighting updates after we finish a painting operation is to make the painting operation a little more efficient. What's actually going on is an MBT frame is being calculated every time we release the mouse, so therefore we can have proper normal maps on our terrain. So now we've created some mountains, I want to go and flatten portions of those mountains. So I'm going to click the Flatten Sculpt tool and go back to my terrain and start painting. And as you can see, I'm flattening various areas of our terrain. Notice I'm just clicking. Now that looks a little ugly. We can see artifacts from our triangles on the terrain. So I want to go and use the Blend or Smooth Sculpt tool to smooth those out. Now I'm going to drag and paint. I'm actually going to increase my inner radius and drag and paint over my terrain. As you can see, it's now becoming a little more smoother between those transition points. Now I'm just painting and dragging and painting. So I'm going to go back to the Elevation Sculpt tool and I'm going to hold down Control and lower some of these larger mountains. So I have a flat little piece in the middle. I'm going to go back to my elevation. I'm going to raise a little bit on the outside. And go back to my Smooth tool and smooth out some of those peaks. Once we've done that, let's go ahead and save our progress. So go to Save, and save your world in some location that you deem necessary. Before we complete this segment of the tutorial, I want to go and add our Elevation Sculpt tool again. And I want to drag and drop our Noise Sculpt tool. Now I'm going to increase our size, or our strength of our noise, and I'm going to start painting on the terrain. And notice I'm elevating as well as applying noise. which actually becomes very handy if you want to paint elevation or paint noise and paint textures or apply multiple operations at the same time. Now note, this looks pretty ugly. Our noise is applied a little too strong. So what I want to do is I'm going to go back to our smooth tool, and I'm going to increase our radius, zoom out, and I'm going to start clicking on our terrain and smooth that out a little bit. Sometimes it helps to just single click the smooth tool on large portions of the terrain in order to just smooth it out in one step. So it looks like we've actually smoothed it a little too much. Scene Designer supports complete undo and redo for terrain editing. So let's go ahead and undo some of those smooth operations. And now I'm going to go back and smooth again, but this time I'm just going to click in a few spots. So now you can see we have a little bumpy terrain and we have a little valley in the middle. Later on we'll add some water into that valley. I would encourage you to play with the different tools and try making different things out of your terrain. That concludes this segment of the video series on terrain. We've gone over various different sculpting tools, and later in the next series we'll start talking about how to paint materials on the terrain.